This question from Connor on Instagram. After reaching 2 Champions League finals in 3 years, where does Simone Inzaghi rank amongst Europe's best coaches, Nicky?
I think he's right up there. Obviously, you've got some exceptional candidates going around Europe. There's some blindingly obvious ones. We could even don't think that one bad season at Manchester City suddenly means we don't put Pep Guardiola in this conversation, given all he's achieved. But if we want to talk about people who've really been, I suppose, more on that upwards trajectory, I think Gianpiero Gasperini's work in getting Atalanta to a European trophy will always be extraordinary. I think Xabi Alonso and Bayer Leverkusen going unbeaten through a whole season, again, incredible. I think this season, Luis Enrique is really showing what not just a tactician, but I think a connector to human beings, frankly, he is at PSG, because I think the way he's got not just, again, a group of players, but a club that just hasn't been able to get itself together for all this time since the Qatari takeover, that hasn't been able to make it work in the way that it should with all the expensive pieces it's had. It feels like Enrique is the first one who's come in and been able to establish a different spirit in the side beyond everything he's doing tactically. So I think there's lots of people you can put in the conversation. But I do think Inzaghi is doing things that are underestimated somehow even still. Taking Inter to 2 Champions League finals in 3 seasons, when remember that before he took over, which is only 4 years ago, they hadn't been to the knockout stages of the Champions League, let alone a final, not to the knockout stages, in 10 years. He's reinvented that club, even when you take the view that, yes, they'd won Serie A under Conte before. He's made them into a European team. He's made Italian football have a greater European dimension, frankly. And I would put that in the context of just a few months ago, after every other Italian team failed to make the quarterfinals, being asked, should we write some things about the crisis of Italian football and the fact that it can't compete in Europe anymore? Well, look, it can if it has the right manager at the right club. So Inter have, by the context of even their direct rivals, have not spent outrageously at all. You can look at Juventus, you can look at Roma as clubs who've spent much, much more money than they have in the last few transfer windows. And yet here they are, in my opinion, still absolutely the best football team in Italy, even if they don't win the league. I think they've played the best football. Yes, they've perhaps tried to push too hard on too many fronts and it's cost them domestically. But the levels they are capable of reaching, as we saw against Barcelona, are some of the best in Europe. And I think Inzaghi, I struggle with ranking and going so-and-so is number 1, but I think he's in the very, very top bracket for me.
He's got to win the Champions League to be number 1, hasn't he?
Maybe.
Maybe. Look, I think you're right, Dotun, in the sense that, we can talk about what coaches do really well, but if you're to be considered an absolute top bracket coach, you have to win the stuff. And I think the thing with Inzaghi, him winning Serie A is absolutely vital to the way he's perceived. Because before that, it's easy for people to dismiss him as a cup manager. Even when we're talking about them doing well in Europe, because it's a cup competition. It's a bit like saying, a Blur or a singles band or whatever, which is that sort of backhanded compliment that people pay to bands that they don't really like. And I think for Simone Inzaghi to win his first Serie A was really, really important to the way that he was perceived and the way that he perceived himself. I think as well, you have to bring in the factor that a lot of the time he's been at Inter, the direction of the club's not been entirely clear. Of course, they've moved in terms of owner. It looked like they might be in massive financial trouble at one point as well. Look, no one's saying he's been poorly resourced, because they've been very, very well resourced with experienced players. And I don't think we should skip that as well. But you can underrate the way that, when we talked about it on the main show, the role of a coach in shielding the players from the noise outside is something, especially with social media, that they have to be better and better at doing. And Hansi Flick's done it very well. Vincent Kompany's done it very well. Simone Inzaghi has done it very well. To go back to Nicky's point about Luis Enrique and the human side, I think that's what people always suspected of Luis Enrique, that he lacked a little bit, to be honest. That he was just a little bit too dogmatic. Now, I wonder if in that sense, PSG has been as good for him as he has been for them. Because you go back to the point where a lot of people said it made their season, where he dropped Ousmane Dembélé for turning up late before they played against Arsenal in the group stage, where they were second best, they were pretty terrible. And I think you can see from the semi-final what progress there has been in that period between now and October. But it wasn't just that he disciplined Dembélé and left him out and then brought him back. A senior group of the players got together and said to him, look, we think you're a bit too strict. And I'm not sure if anyone had said that to him before, and certainly not a group of senior players. And I wonder how many clubs that could happen, like a group of senior players step to someone who's got the status of Luis Enrique and say, as a small group, we think on behalf of the team, you're doing this wrong. And of course, all the greatest coaches evolve. Carlo Ancelotti is a very good example of that. And Luis Enrique turns around and says, not get stuffed, but you're right, and steps off them a little bit. And I think you can talk about the tactical changes, but how they've evolved on a human level, I think is really important. And of course, I think it's entirely commensurate with the amount of industry they put into it. It feels that has all clicked.
I just think there's thing you mentioned there, Andy, which is interesting, because we were saying on the main show yesterday about Kvaratskhelia and how well he's integrated Lewis with the PSG and his relationship with Luis Enrique, and how one of the things that he said about Luis Enrique is he's got this humanity to him, he's very empathetic. And actually one of the qualities that Francesco Acerbi, who of course we also talked about yesterday scoring for Inter, one of the qualities he's singled out when he's been asked about Inzaghi in the past is empathy. That's the thing he said. He said, he's very kind, he's very empathetic. Acerbi did also say when he was asked about Inzaghi, he said he's also very lucky, but I suppose that's a good quality to have as well.
Indeed. This question from Vinny on YouTube. Would Vanja Milinković-Savić be an effective backup or replacement for Andre Onana at Manchester United?
Yeah, I certainly could be. It's crazy to think, isn't it, that as we've just been watching Jan Sommer be brilliant for Inter in a Champions League semi-final and how he cost 6 million, how tragic this has been, this period for Onana at Manchester United, and how little he's lived up to what was hoped of him. But Milinković-Savić has been a solid shot stopper. I think he's a decent goalkeeper. I don't know if I'm putting him in that bracket of quote unquote elite that everyone's reaching for all the time, but there's not always a totally clear trajectory on that either for goalkeepers. I think goalkeepers, we used to know this clearly, that goalkeepers could continue to mature as they get older, and I think Milinković-Savić still has room to grow. He's a solid goalkeeper. I think that's maybe that's enough for them right now.
I think the thrust of Vinny's question is really interesting, because he asks, would Milinković-Savić be an effective backup or replacement for Onana? Because I think United have to accept the fact they might not be able to sell Onana, and certainly not for the sort of money that they want to, because they overpaid for him in the first place. Now, look, as Nicky has said, this was a great deal for Inter. The fact they managed to pick him up on a free, sell him for 50 mil the year afterwards, and pick up Jan Sommer, who's very experienced, a very different sort of goalkeeper, but very, very good goalkeeper, and a good guy to have in the dressing room. They pick him up for peanuts, and he's done really well in that time, of course. But I think it is really important, the sort of goalkeeper that United go and buy, because if they can't shift Onana, they can't buy someone. They need to buy someone who competes with him rather than replaces him, because otherwise they're just putting him on the road to worthlessness. If they go and buy Diogo Costa off Porto, that would be a good signing. He's a great goalkeeper. He's the right age. He's got personality, commands his box. All of those things in terms of presence are the things that I guess Manchester United would want to aspire to, and they would hope for in a new Manchester United goalkeeper. I don't think you can do that deal if you can't shift Onana as well, because you're putting him into a position where you're saying, not just to him, but to the rest of the market, we don't want him. And you're creating a massive problem for yourself. So the way that Manchester United are and the position that they are financially, they need to do a deal where they either get rid of Onana now or preserve his value on some sort of level. So whether that's meaning someone comes in as competition for him or whether you loan him out, that's what they have to have an eye on.
A really intriguing question, Vinny. Thank you for that, and keep them coming. Chris on email says, with mumblings that Leroy Sané, and we touched on this in the main OTC programme yesterday, the idea that Leroy Sané could be taking a cut in his salary. With mumblings that Leroy Sané could leave Bayern Munich at the end of the season, could a reunion with Mikel Arteta at Arsenal be on the cards?
I think it could be. And I think you look at the way that Sané is going. Bayern have been a little bit surprised by the way the negotiations went, because his contract has been a millstone since he joined from Manchester City. They picked him up relatively cheaply compared to the time and compared to his quality and potential when they bought him in from City, because he only had a year left on his contract. But that contract that he signed with Bayern has been something they've been struggling to get out of from most of that time. Now, look, he's had his good moments at Bayern. He's had his less good moments at Bayern. He's coming off probably his best season, certainly his best season numbers-wise. I think his work off the ball has improved as well, although he is still... He's not 10 out of 10 every week. And I think that's a problem. He is frustrating. And it's particularly frustrating, Dotun, if you're paying that guy 20 million after tax. So they realised they couldn't do that again. They thought they had come to an agreement with his reps for just under half that figure, which I think represents like good value for Bayern, I think you could say. And now he's just signed with Pini Zahavi. You don't sign with Pini Zahavi as an agent if you're planning to take a 55% wage cut or whatever, do you? So that to me suggests that he either wants to renegotiate with Bayern, which they are not keen to do, or move elsewhere, which, you know, if one doesn't work, then two might be his only option. He, unlike Kingsley Coman last year, he's not interested in going to the Middle East. He wants to stay in Europe. And it feels to me as if he has unfinished business in the Premier League. Now, he knows Arteta well from Manchester City already. I think if this week's Champions League told us anything or reminded us of anything, is that if Arsenal are looking to go to the next level, looking to go to where they want to go, Gabriel Martinelli, I like him a lot. He's going to be a squad player, surely, for them. He can't be a starter for them. He's not a young guy anymore. He's not developed at the pace that they wanted, and he's not as consistent as they wanted. Sané is a better player than him. Of course, he can play left, often plays right, so maybe the signing of Sané would take a little bit of pressure off Bukayo Saka as well. Saka is a player who's needed rest for a really long time, and I think immediately after he came back from that injury, you saw the benefit of that. So I could see a lot of advantages to signing Sané.
As we've got a gooner in the room, let's move swiftly on to Caleb on YouTube's question. And this is for you, Nicky. With one defeat in their last 6 matches, has Igor Tudor done enough to convince Juventus that he's the right man to lead them in next season and beyond?
I don't think he's necessarily done that yet. I think there's mixed response so far. I think there's definitely a part of the club that's really appreciated him. It was interesting hearing Alessio Tacchinardi, former player, talk about what he liked about Igor Tudor at Juventus. What he said was he's given them back personality. And I think that's something that certainly will resonate with a lot of Juventus supporters, because I think that was one of the great things that felt like it was missing first under Max Allegri, and perhaps it's a long-standing criticism of Max Allegri that his teams don't always play with a particularly charming personality. They can be quite soul-destroying to watch at times, and I think that was something that perhaps we really expected from Thiago Motta, was that if there was nothing else, there was going to be a clear identity that was going to come through with this Juventus team, and in the end that didn't really happen. We saw some glimpses of it at the start, and then it disappeared again. And yeah, you know, what does personality mean in the case of Igor Tudor at Juventus? They're much more aggressive. They're much more in teams' faces. They have got that front-footedness that perhaps wasn't always there. But when you look at the results, it is a mixed bag, bluntly. They did lose to Parma. They did draw with Bologna in a game that they were in front in. They are not taking this straight line to the Champions League spots that everyone desperately wants them to. Their wins have come against teams like Lecce, like Monza, teams at the bottom end of Serie A. So I think the next 3 games are going to obviously be defining because it's the end of the season. But I think this next one against Lazio probably has big implications for not just Tudor's future, but probably for other people's futures as well.
I think that's it. There are 2 angles to this question, really. One is like what we think of what he's done so far is absolutely irrelevant if he doesn't qualify for the Champions League. If he doesn't qualify for the Champions League, he's gone. And the other angle to this is I don't know what Igor Tudor could have done really to completely convince Juventus that he was the guy going forward, because he's someone who, as we identified at the beginning, he's got a very specific way of playing. He needs a pre-season with his squad, and he hasn't had it. He's been dropped into this situation where they're on the back foot, and it's like, okay, be the A team. I'm going to lock you in a shed and, make a tank out of a couple of iron rods and some discarded cans. It's impossible, really. So all he could really do, I guess, is convince people with a few results. And to me, it always seemed that he's not that back to basics coach who's going to trim it down. Actually, funnily enough, say if Tudor had the job in the first place and you were replacing him with Thiago Motta, that might have worked a bit better. I think because he would sort your defence out really quickly. And I think explain concepts to players in quite bite-sized chunks. Tudor's different. He's totally confrontational. And he's like, right, it's my way or you're out on the street, basically, which makes it quite difficult. And I know people say, oh, well, maybe that's a short, sharp shot. I think there's just too much for the players to absorb. And of course, the other question Juventus have got, Nicky, is dependent on what happens between now and the end of the season. Say they can qualify for the Champions League. Let's say they do finish top 4. Does that buy Tudor the Club World Cup?
Yeah, of course. It's a genuine dilemma for Juventus. If they are thinking at all about changing manager, do you want to make that choice before you go into that tournament, or would you rather give yourself more time to do it? Of course, listen, Juventus have got people right now doing their due diligence. There are, without question, conversations happening behind doors about if we don't stick with Tudor, who's the option? And there people are being sounded out. Those conversations are happening. But I think Andy's absolutely highlighted an extra stressor in this whole thing, which is how do you want to approach that summer tournament? And again, managers want time to bring in their ideas and need time to bring in their ideas. And probably if you were going to change course, I think it would make sense to try and get someone in for that Club World Cup, because even though it probably would not be ideal for the tournament itself, it would mean at least they'd hit the ground running in Serie A, having had that competitive run-up.
It's a massive problem for all these Club World Cup clubs. If you're like a Juventus and you're in need of a bit of a rethink, when are you going to do it? You've just not got time to do it. And we talked about Tudor having that pre-season. Imagine they qualify for the top 4. Imagine they take him to the Club World Cup and they produce an acceptable enough performance that I think will continue with him. Prepare for an Igor Tudor season on 3 days of holiday. Like, good luck with that. I mean, it's just... I know it's not a unique position to Juventus. Like it's a position that a lot of these clubs are going to find themselves in. And our friend Tim Vickery has said numerous times in recent months, he's no idea how the biggest European clubs are going to cope with next season after they've done the Club World Cup. And I totally subscribe to that. But I think for Juventus and the particular situation that they're in, there's just no easy answers.
There's no easy answer to the next question. So put your thinking caps on. Jonah on Instagram asks, who at the moment looks like the next young superstar in Italy? Nicky?
Yeah, there's I'm sure there's lots of names you could pick through, but the one that came to me when this question came up, unfortunately, wasn't an Italian player, but the question is in Italy, and the one that jumped through to my mind was actually Nico Paz at Como. We've been talking at the end of the main show about Cesc Fabregas and his potential future, and I think perhaps the the key part of his impressive Como season, and they've won, I think, the last 5 games. They're headed for a nice, comfortable mid-table finish, possibly a top half, has been Paz, who's come from Real Madrid, technically on a permanent deal to Como, but it doesn't feel like a permanent deal because they have options to buy him back at derisively low fees for the next 3 years. I believe they run through to 2027. So effectively, the very strongly most likely scenario is that Paz is going to end up back at Real Madrid sooner or later. But he's a number 10, really, really intelligent, and I'm trying to think what the right word is, just very exceptionally good at looking after the ball. Number 10, someone who really protects it and knows how to look after it without necessarily having some of those traits like blazing speed that catch your eye. I think, if anything, maybe there's some hint, don't want to overstate this, but some hint of the Kvaratskhelia about it is that ability to be very tricksy with your close feet and also strong at the same time, because he's not a waif. I think he's probably a little bit bigger than Kvaratskhelia, and to dictate a game from that number 10 spot, which I think he's done really, really effectively for Como. He's only 20 years old. I think he's got a real future ahead of him. My worry for him slightly is that he's going to do that thing we see all the time with Real Madrid players who go somewhere else and do well, which is he'll come back there, not get any game time for a couple of years, and have to go on again before he actually gets his chance to show us what he's capable of.
I think they're a little bit conscious of that, because Inter have been talking to Real Madrid for a couple of months saying, if you buy him back, we'll buy him off you and there'll be a higher buyback. And I think maybe that's his next level. Maybe he stays in Serie A. So we're talking about the next young superstar in Italy, as Nicky has taken Jonah's question very literally. I'm going to do exactly the same. I can imagine Nico Paz going up a level in Italy. He's terrific to watch. And I think it's quite interesting that when they signed Dele, of course he's been out of the game for a long time, but he's a player of substance who we all think can get back to doing very well and has done great things in the past. Cesc Fabregas signs him and goes, yeah, you're the backup to Nico Paz. I mean, even bearing in mind that Dele has been out of the game for a bit, I think that shows you how much faith they have in him. Funnily enough, the player I would have picked would have been another Como player. I would have picked Assane Diao, who's come over from Betis, who's had a great start, sort of wide forward. It's so exciting. And he'd started well at Betis and got a little bit stuck. And funnily enough, you look at Como have kind of repurposed a couple of these players. Now, obviously, Diaw's different because he's only 19 years old. He's a little bit younger, but they did it with Maxence Caqueret, who looked like Lyon's version of Xavi, really, if you go back a couple of years. It was brilliant in the 2020 Champions League semi-finals and Lyon's run to that. And he got a bit stuck. And Fabregas has said, yeah, I can make you into the footballer you should be. And I think that's what we talked in the main show about, the possibility of Cesc Fabregas going off to Roma or Leipzig or Leverkusen or wherever else. Now, it'd be interesting to see him do stuff there at any of those clubs. But on the other hand, the sort of players that he's aiming to bring in with Como, now we know they've got better financial resource than clubs that are actually traditionally bigger than them in many cases. But the profile of players that they're going for is quite Leipzig-y, really, isn't it? That they want to set themselves up as a developer of players as well. And they're prepared to go and get elite talent and make it better. Now, how that works post-Fabregas, if they do end up in a post-Fabregas situation, who they get in to replace Fabregas, I think will probably have at least a bit of an effect, certainly short term on that model. So interested to see how that goes from a few different angles.
It is that time when we ask you to recommend a game of the week for us. Brought to you by FotMob. Each week our experts recommend a game for you to watch at weekend, and just as importantly, they also suggest what you can eat with it. So, Andy, let's start with your recommendation for Game of the Week. Where are you going?
If I was a Portuguese stadium announcer, I would pick up my microphone and I would go, Benfica contra Sporting.
I can do that.
Because, honestly, it's the only place we can go this week. It's the Clásico anyway. 2 games left in the Portuguese league season. These 2 teams on equal points at the top. Now, the goal difference is very close, but that doesn't really matter. Not for the moment, at least, because Sporting won the first game just after Christmas. So it's on head-to-head first before we get to goal difference. So Sporting need a draw out of this, and then they win the final game, they win the league. So they don't need to win both league games. Even though the teams are on equal points, they don't need to win both league games to come out as champions for the second successive season, despite the exit of Ruben Amorim. They're 19 unbeaten in the Liga, so they've kind of semi-recovered from losing Amorim, which was a massive shock mid-season. Benfica have accelerated brilliantly to put the pressure on them. But last weekend is ended up in this exciting spot because if you go back to last Sunday night, Sporting playing Gil Vicente, who at the time was still mathematically could have got relegated, sort of lower mid-table team. They're losing 1-0 for ages, score twice in the last 10 minutes, including a late goal from Eduardo Quaresma. Brilliant goal. No relation, by the way. He's in tears. His teammates are in tears. The fans are in tears. It's that part of the season where it's so intense.
You're in tears.
For that, I've just got something in my eye,
Okay.
Don. But I think the point is that it's going to be so intense, so busy. It's a cathedral, the Estádio da Luz, that you're only going to have time for a prego no pau, which is a sort of Portuguese steak sandwich. The vans in front of the stadium sell it. Maybe treat yourself to a second one if you're particularly peckish, and a pastel de nata as dessert, right? But don't forget the cinnamon. Don't forget the cinnamon.
A third?
A third?
Yeah. Like
you're a law unto yourself.
I know.
Who am I to stop you?
2 or 3 shredded wheats. That's what I'm at. So that's on Saturday at 6 p.m, yeah?
It is.
Nikki, what are you going for as the game of the week?
Well, I can't feel that maybe Andy and I have both bluffed each other out because neither of us has taken the Spanish Clásico up between Barcelona and Real Madrid. But I have gone with Atalanta versus Roma on Monday at 7:45 UK time. I am just enjoying watching Ranieri's story too much. Maybe it's a bit one note. I know we had Roma last week, but they won again and they're up to this 19-game unbeaten run. Milos Sevilla, we talked about, third in saves per match in Serie A. He's having a fascinating time, fascinating things at the other end of the pitch with Soulé. And perhaps the stakes have dipped a little bit now for Atalanta. They're looking pretty safe for third spot, but still haven't quite sewn up that. So a loss here could drag them back into that conversation with Juventus and Lazio, as we've been talking about, all competing for that spot, and Bologna as well. So definitely not a game they're going to want to lose. I can't help it. I love Claudio. I want to see whether or not the Tinkerman can pull off one more miracle at the end of his career.
I can't help it. I love Italian food. So what am I going to eat with it?
Well, actually this week I felt like it should be a tribute to Simone Inzaghi, even though he's not involved in this game. I think this is Inzaghi's week, taking them back to a Champions League final. So his favourite food is pizza fritta con prosciutto, like his grandmother used to make. That's just fried pizza dough. It's a nice light version of fried pizza dough served with some ham. Keep it simple and hang out with your grandmothers, because that's his grandmother's treat she always used to give him.
Can I have 2 slices?